Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue my series about adapting the fighting fantasy rules to a Twine game using the Sword and Planet subgenre of science fiction to inspire the setting and plot. But before I do that, I would like to make a quick announcement. If you're new to the channel, you might not know that all of the code examples that I demonstrate in these videos, in this Fighting Fantasy series and in the other things that I've done before that, I upload to itch.io, and anyone can download them there if they want to have a closer look at something that I've done. And I link to that in the description of this video and in the description of any other video that deals with code, which is almost all of them. And recently, because those files, of course, were getting bigger and bigger, I thought it would be a good idea to split them into two and have the current project as one download and the old files as a separate download. And that way people who wanted to keep up with what I was doing wouldn't have to download all the old files over and over again. They could just download the old files once and then download the most recent version of the current file. And it would also, as well as being quicker for them, it would also be quicker for me to upload. And I did that, but I made a mistake. When you're dealing with your own files on itch.io, you can tick a box that says something like hide this file and prevent it from being downloaded. I assume that's for people who are using itch.io as a sort of storage space, but they're not ready to have those files sort of shown to the public. And I accidentally clicked that button on one of the files, but I didn't notice until I came back a couple of days later. So for a couple of days, essentially, if you went there, you wouldn't have had all of the files downloadable. They were there, but they were sort of invisible to anyone who came to the page. But I have fixed that now, so if you've experienced that problem, when you go back now, it should be fine. I actually fixed it a couple of days ago. I meant to make this announcement in my previous video, but it just slipped my mind to do it. So I'm sorry about that. Anyway, let's have a look at the game. If you've been following this series, you'll not notice anything different. There isn't anything different on this first screen. But let's choose this character because I have done something new and it is easier to get to that new bit if your character has low luck. So I'll choose this character. Again, this is all as it has been. But once we click this, we'll have to test our luck, and if we are unlucky, then there'll be some new material. So we're taken to the village, we see this thing in the pit, we're not sure whether we want to jump in the pit or not, but if we choose to jump in the pit, we test our luck. Oh, we were lucky. Let's try it again. There we go. We're unlucky, and now we have some new material. It says you advance towards the creature, if creature it is, and when we press continue, we will have a picture and a title and a skill and a stamina, and in fact we will, if you've seen the early parts of this series where I was just setting up the combat system, you'll recognize that I've managed to make that combat system talk to the sort of story system, which up to now it hasn't done. When I started this series on Fighting Fantasy, I wrote a combat system, and I kept it, but thus far it's been sort of separate to the system for going through a story. But I have now written a way that they can talk to each other. So I won't demonstrate this in too much detail because we've already gone through it. It's only really the picture that's different. So we can keep fighting. We got wounded. We can choose to use our luck on that wound, or we could use our luck to try and make a wound that we deliver more severe. And we can escape, or we could keep going until the creature was dead, or we can escape. And of course, if we escape, we get wounded, because that's the penalty of escape. And of course we get to a section that hasn't been written yet, because of course most of the game hasn't been written yet. But that's not the only thing I've done. But for today, I will tell you how I've made the two systems talk to each other. So I'll just zoom out a little bit and remind you that this page deals with the sidebar, essentially, where our skill, stamina and luck are stored. Just about everything else on the right of this line, so that everything from sort of here and to the right is the combat system that I wrote, and everything on the left, these four and this, is the story system, I suppose you could say. It's the system that we've been using to show how we can have choices and you know, rolling against your skill and attribute changes and all the other different things that a fighting fantasy adventure will have, and have it be coherent, have the player move from one section to another, and it be the sections that we want, and have everything working in the way that we want. But up to now, we haven't had combat as one of the possibilities. But if you look at the Who Is Left page and the Escape page, you can see that they now both have an arrow that leads to main. So obviously there's now a way of getting from this combat system to main, which is the as the name suggests, the sort of the place where we'll spend most of our time, where the program will spend most of its time. And we might guess that there's also a way of getting from main to the combat system, which of course there is. So that's what I'm going to show you today. So if we look at main, and now we'll just zoom in again to make it a bit more easy to read, you will remember that most of this code, everything from here on down, and you can see from this bar that that's virtually at the top of the page, is a big if, else if structure. So it's if dollars $s $a1 is equal to 0, then we do this. Else if that same section equals 1, we do something else. Else if it equals 2, we do something else. That one's sort of quite a long one. I'm sorry, I missed a few there. We have, where's the 3? Oh yeah, we have 3, 4, 5, and so on. Not in any particular order, except the order in which I needed them. There's no real logical order to why is 1 particular thing, why is 7 one thing and 8 another. It's just as I came to the need to have a different type of code, I added a new number. And the most recent number that I've added is, nope, it's not that one. I've gone too far. There we go. It is combat. If $s $a1 equals 12, then we do what's in there, and that will take us to the combat system. In other words, it allows the current story system that we've got to sort of talk to the existing combat system. So you'll remember that $s is the array where the most of the details of the paragraphs are kept, or the sections. We have the text, and we also have the codes related to what sort of choice, what sort of section it is, and then the details of that. So if it's a choice, what's the text of the choices, and where do the different choices lead? If it's testing your luck, where do you go if you're lucky, and where do you go if you're unlucky, and so on. $a is the variable that keeps track of which section we're currently in. So when we look at S, we're always going to be looking at $s, $a, something, because we always want to look at data related to the section that we're in rather than some other section. So when I set up the combat system, I used a whole bunch of different variables. So I used $op to be the number of opponents that you had. I used $ES to be whether you can escape, and if so, on what round, because that's a mechanic that Fighting Fantasy uses. In some combats it says, in most combats you can't escape, but in some you have the option of escaping. Sometimes you have the option of escaping straight away. Sometimes you have the option of escaping after a certain number of rounds. And so I wanted to have the program have that possibility as well. So we store that in $ES. If $ES is 0, you can't escape. And if it is 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., it means you can escape on round 1, 2, 3, or 4, or on any later round. And then for each opponent, we need to keep their track of their skill and their stamina, of course, but we also need some internal stuff. We need to know what file name we're looking for when we display their picture. We need to know what title to put above the picture of the monster, and we also need, and these can be the same, but sometimes they're a little bit different. We also need to know what to call it when we say the monster wounds you, or do we say the tribesman wounds you, or do we say the werewolf wounds you if it was a fantasy game, or do we say something else? And they can be slightly different, because if we have, for example, if we have multiple, let's say we're fighting 3 werewolves, we might call the 3 werewolves Werewolf 1, Werewolf 2, and Werewolf 3, but we wouldn't say the Werewolf 1 wounds you. We would just say the werewolf wounds you. And so sometimes sometimes the title above the picture and the name that we use in reporting what's happening are slightly different. We can't have a single variable and derive those two reliably, unfortunately. It sort of seems like we should, because often they are just the same, especially if we're dealing with a single opponent. But it seems it's easier to put them in 2 separate variables. I discussed that in a bit more detail when I was setting this up. But so obviously what we need in this new section is we need a way of reliably moving the data from the S array into these different variables, and that is exactly what I've done. If we look at initialize, which is where the $S array is stored, at the bottom I have a list of all of the different possible types of section, and then for each section I have which slot, what the meaning of the different the data in the different slots is. What does it refer to? And so for combat, this is probably the most complicated one so far, because as I say, combat is the most sort of complex bit of the Fighting Fantasy rules, probably. Not that any of it's really that complex, but combat's probably the most complex. So I have this list that says slot 2 is going to be the number of enemies, and that's stored in the OP variable. Slot 3 is going to give the paragraph to go to if the player wins. Slot 4 is the paragraph to go to if the player escapes, or just NA if they can't escape. These two might be the same, or they might be different. Sometimes they'll be different because you go to a different place, like you're running back the way you came. Sometimes they'll be different not because you're in a different physical place, but because if you kill the monster, you get some sort of reward, whereas if you escape, you don't get that reward. Like you kill the werewolf and then you examine it and you find that in its pockets it's got some gold or something like that, if it was a fantasy a fantasy story. Slot 5 is the round on which the player can escape, or 0 if they can't. And then for each enemy we have the order to store the different bits of data. So in this case I've decided fairly arbitrarily to go with the picture, or the sort of picture caption, the text to use when reporting on what happens, the file name for their picture, their skill, and their stamina. And that order is completely arbitrary. I could have done it. I mean, usually we talk about skill before stamina in Fighting Fantasy, but skill and stamina could have been the first two instead of the last two. It's just, you've just got to pick an order and use it consistently. And so when we have an example of combat, and so far we only have one. Now where is it? Sorry, it's the S array is, as you can see, getting quite substantial, even though there's not really that much, but there are a lot of paragraphs. So here we are. You advance towards the creature, if creature it is, and then we have 12. That tells us it's a combat. 1, that tells us that there's only one opponent. 1 AQ and 1 AR, they are telling us that they're the paragraphs that we'll end up going to if we don't die. We'll go to one of those if we win and the other if we escape. And then we have the various elements of the creature. Now, what is that one? Sorry, let me just look at this again. Oh, right, of course, the round on which you can escape. Sorry, I forgot about that. I've probably scrolled past. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay. And then it just has pit creature, the pit creature, and pit creature. It's a bit annoying that we have to have that 3 times. It sort of feels like we should be able to just do something once and derive those things from it. But unfortunately, it doesn't quite work in all cases, and so it's a bit easier to have 3, unfortunately. And then we just have its skill and its stamina. All right. And so once we've got that, once we've worked out the order in which things are going to happen, and then if we had more than one enemy, if we were fighting 3 pit creatures or something, we'd have to repeat the last 5 things however many times we had other creatures. So this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all of those 5 are sort of per enemy. So in this case, we only have 1 enemy, but we might have sort of pit creature 2, the pit creature again if it was using the same file name, and then it might have the same skill and stamina, or it might have slightly different. And then we'd have another 5 for the 3rd pit creature if we were fighting 3 of them. So once we have that order, once we know the order that things are in, or we've decided the order that we're going to put things in, and we've written down which variable to use, and I've just noticed I've made a mistake that I put skill array and stamina array when I meant $SK and $ST array. So sorry about that. I'll fix that as soon as I can. Once we have that done, it's fairly straightforward. We just have to code putting the value of a given slot into a given variable, making sure that we do it in the same order. So we just say, where does it start? There it is. Sorry, I probably should put a note here as well that says that it's combat. But yeah, so that's what we do. We set $OP equal to the 2nd slot in the relevant part of the S array. We set ES, which is so that's the number of opponents. ES is the round upon which you can escape. Then for each of the opponents, which is however many there are is stored in $OP, we set $EDZ equals that slot, ERZ equals that slot, FNZ equals that slot, SK equals that slot, and ST equals that slot. And these are the 5 arrays that relate to individual opponents. And so the way this works is fairly simple. It's Z times 5 plus 1. So initially, Z will be 1. 1 times 5 plus 1 is 6. And then these are the same except for one more. So that'll be slot 6, slot 7, slot 8, slot 9, and slot 10 that we'll be reading from. And then if OP was 2, then the second time we went through, that would be 2 times 5 plus 1, which is 11. So it would read continuously. It'll be sort of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and then if there was a 3rd opponent, etc. And then once we've done all that, we set $RO equal to 0. That is the round number, what round it is. we set it to 0 rather than 1 because $RO is incremented at the beginning of the combat system. And then we have a continue button, which takes us to the who is left page, which is the sort of starting page of the combat system. And that's how we move from the story section to the combat system. But of course, we need to move from the combat section to back to the story section. And that's fairly straightforward. There's only, if you don't die, well, if your character dies, well, obviously you're not going back to the story system. You'll just get a message that you're dead. But if your character either prevails or escapes, well, then they will be going back to the story section. But that's the only two circumstances in which that will happen. So for escape, that's down here in the page named escape. And when you escape, you might die because you take two stamina damage from each opponent that's still left alive. And we check whether the character's stamina is still 1 or more. And if not, we say, sorry, your adventure is over. But if it is, if they are still alive, we set $A equal to $S, $A4, because we already specified that slot 4 was the one where the escape paragraph was. And then we just go back to main. And then it will read the data from that new paragraph number and continue on the story. And similarly, up here, who is left, it'll count the number of enemies still left alive, and if Z is, it'll put it in slot variable Z, sorry, and if Z is 0, well, that means the player's won. They've got no enemies. So we set, and I've just realised that's a mistake. I've got one of those is wrong. Sorry, I've used the same slot. Let me just look at this. I'll fix this in the version that you get, but how does this work? It's meant to be, oh boy, this is highly professional. Let's have a look. Okay, slot 4 is the paragraph to go to if the player escapes, and slot 5 is, slot 3 is the paragraph to go to if the player wins. So that shouldn't be, okay, so that shouldn't be slot 4, it should be slot 3. Sorry about that, highly professional. All right, the version that you will download, I will fix it in that. So we set, so when the player has won, we set the $A, the paragraph, to whatever's in slot 3 of the relevant part of the S array, and then we just, again, go back to main and continue the story from there. And that is how we get this part of the game to talk to this part of the game, essentially, that you can move back and forth between going through the story and having a combat. That's not the only thing I've done, but I'll leave it there for now. I'll save the other thing that I've done for later, so as not to make the video too long. I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.